After Charlie Kirk's killing, Trump has launched a sweeping crackdown, tightening speech rules and expanding executive policing powers. Trump's Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is drawing fire after declaring whole categories of dissent as, quote, hate speech, unprotected by the First Amendment.
Boy, that was 10 seconds and probably an hour of live time.
Right.
There's so much packed in there. But rather than starting out with what's going on right now with Trump and Bondi and Kash Patel and Stephen Miller and others, Alex Jones, I want to start on a positive note. How about that, Sam?
Oh, you do?
I do.
Okay.
I want to give you some historical examples of how American presidents have gotten it right, not wrong like Trump and his allies. It is possible to get this right, even when dealing with tragedies that have taken hundreds or even thousands of lives. And I'll give you an example of one Democratic and one Republican president.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Let's start with the Oklahoma City bombings of 1995. Do you remember those?
No, I was 3 years old.
Absolutely horrific bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, claimed hundreds of lives, including the lives of children, because there was a daycare center for the children of federal employees. One of the worst tragedies in the history of the United States. It was during the tenure, of course, of President Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton could have used this tragedy as an excuse for going after his political enemies on the right. Timothy McVeigh, the bomber, had far closer ties to the radical right than the suspected assassin of Charlie Kirk has to the radical left. We don't know if he has any ties at all, but Timothy McVeigh was deeply immersed in what was the far-right militia movement at the time. So it could have offered a real opportunity for an unscrupulous president who didn't care much about the Constitution to use this to demonize, attack, seek revenge, persecute his political enemies. Did he do that, Sam?
No.
Not at all. He did just the opposite. He used it as an opportunity to genuinely bring the nation together. And there are those who say he was in a lot of trouble. Democrats had suffered egregious losses in the midterm elections of 1994, some of the worst losses by an incumbent party in history. They lost control of both houses of Congress in 1994 for the first time since the early days of the Eisenhower administration, 40 years before. Everyone was talking about a one-term president. So Clinton was on his heels, but instead of going on the offensive against his enemies, he tried to bring us together. I'll just give you a couple of lines of the amazing speech that Clinton made. Quote, "The anger you feel is valid, but you must not allow yourselves to be consumed by it." So recognizing that people are angry, but saying, don't let the anger consume you and control you. The hurt you feel must not be allowed to turn into hate. Don't turn this into hating on your enemies. Instead, turn it into the search for justice. The loss you feel must not paralyze your own lives. Could that be any more different, Sam, than what we've been hearing from Trump and his allies in the aftermath of the Kirk tragedy?
Pretty different.
Yeah. And let's start with a Republican now. An even bigger tragedy. You know what I'm talking about, don't you?
9/11.
9/11 took thousands of lives. And I'm talking about President George W. Bush. Who perpetrated that bombing, Sam? Do you know?
Al-Qaeda?
Yes. And what kind of organization were they?
A terrorist organization?
Yeah, but what kind of terrorists? What were they?
Islamic.
Supposedly Islamic terrorists, exactly. And again, Bush could have used this as an opportunity to exploit xenophobia, anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States, to go after Muslims, to go after immigrants, to claim his political opponents were soft on immigration.
Well, he certainly used it for some pretty bad things.
I get to that. Yes, I understand that.
Okay, I'm just saying.
But in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, he was extraordinary, like Clinton, bringing us together rather than exploiting it. He said, "I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists are traitors to their own faith, trying in effect to hijack Islam itself. The enemy of America is not our many Muslim friends. It's not our many Arab friends. Our enemy is a radical network of terrorists and every government that supports them." I think that was George W. Bush's finest moment of his presidency.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
It got a lot worse from there.
Got a lot worse, and I'm going to talk about that. All right. So you could do it differently. There are great historical models from both sides of the aisle. And I could talk about, other presidents as well. But I think that Republican and that Democratic model shows you what could be. But sadly, it isn't. Now I want to talk about some historical examples on the other side where political leaders have exploited tragedies or kind of exaggerated tragedies, not to knit the nation together, not to speak to the greater angels of our being, but to divide us. And I first want to talk about, I'll do one Democrat, one Republican. I want to talk about the Great Red Scare of 1919. There was anti-communist hysteria in the United States after the Bolshevik Revolution and the end of World War II. Totally unfounded, but there was this belief that the United States was under threat of being overturned by internal communists. Totally exaggerated. And there were some bombings and attempted bombings. One life was lost. And in those days, a lot of conservatism was in the Democratic Party, particularly Southern Democrats. That didn't change, particularly in the election of 1994 in the late 20th century. And one of those Democratic conservatives was A. Mitchell Palmer, the Attorney General of the United States. And he used these incidents and the fear of communism to go after left-wingers and particularly immigrants. He arrested people on the streets in their homes. Sound familiar? No warrants, no judicial proceedings. And guess what he did with every immigrant that he could, Sam? He deported them, setting a precedent for subsequent deportations. And these were not illegal immigrants. That notion was not yet developed except for the excluded Asians. That didn't develop until a little bit later with the Restriction Act of 1924. And this was exploited in the United States, get this, Sam, to greatly escalate anti-Semitism. Guess who was blamed for communist agitation?
Jews.
The Jews. Henry Ford, the leading industrialist of the time, published a 4-volume set of books called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, in which he said the Jews were plotting to dominate the world, as supposedly described in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a forged document from the old Russian Tsar's secret police. He believed that the Jews were behind the communists. Hear a lot of that today as well. A U.S. House investigating committee dominated by Republicans talked about the Jews leading the American Communist Party. the district organizers are responsible for communist activities throughout the nation, forming districts among factory workers, political campaigns, and others. Quote, a large percentage of all the known communist district organizers are, guess who?
Jews.
Jews. Exactly. So you can see all the negative implications when you try to turn an event, which may be dangerous and tragic, into an attack on alleged political enemies. And this isn't so much an attack on political enemies, but it is another pretext for a supposed tragedy to create a much worse tragedy. And again, I'll pick on a Democrat here, picking on Democrats a lot tonight. You know who I'm talking about? Lyndon Johnson. Did you ever hear of the famous Tonkin Gulf incident?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, basically a fabricated story that North Vietnamese boats had attacked two American destroyers, the Maddox and the Sea Turner Joy. Nobody knows if they were ever really attacked. It was bad weather. No one was injured. No damage. But you know what this became a pretext for?
The Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War, a decade of war that claimed tens of thousands of American lives and perhaps some millions of Asian lives. And of course, it's not a president, but you've heard of the infamous Joe McCarthy, one of Donald Trump's heroes.
Yes.
And he used an alleged communist infiltration of the U.S. State Department to launch a wholesale attack on left-wingers, people of deviant sexuality, supposedly, as they called it. They had much worse names for it in those days, destroying the lives of many Americans and not rooting out a single communist threat to the security of the United States. And of course, we know that Vladimir Putin used the pretext of Nazis taking over Ukraine as one of the justifications for his horrific, bloody, aggressive invasion of Ukraine. So, there's a right way and a wrong way to deal with these matters. And Donald Trump and his allies are going about it in all the wrong way, becoming another cautionary tale, another negative example that generations of Americans will look upon with scorn. Even before Sam, he knew who the suspect was, right? Much less anyone had confessed, right? They didn't know who had committed the act. He was blaming the left, claiming this violence is due to left-wing extremists. And he has continued, not only rhetorically to attack that, many of his allies have called for war. Exactly the opposite of what George W. Bush did after 9/11, exactly the opposite of what Bill Clinton did in 1995 after the Murrah Federal Building bombing. He has taken all the wrong lessons of history to try to exploit a tragedy. And in so doing, basically, he and Pam Bondi trashing the Constitution. You cannot prosecute and imprison people because they say things you do not like. Thanks for watching our video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a member today.